Hello and welcome to the first op-ed of Mysterious Headlines. This video will be a little different than previous videos. It's unscripted, and this will be my views and thoughts about the recent Netflix series Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel. So let's start. Elisa was born Lam Ho-E on April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. In 2012, she was a student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, but she was not registered for classes at the beginning of 2013. She had one sister. Her parents were immigrants from Hong Kong who owned a Chinese restaurant. She grew up speaking Cantonese as well as English. And I didn't see anything stating that her trip to California was her first trip outside of Canada or not. I presume it wasn't if she still had family in Hong Kong, but this was her first solo trip, and she wanted to explore the world. She was a big fan of social media with blogs on Tumblr and Blogspot, and she'd had an online presence for a while. Her Tumblr blog, Nouvelle Nouveau, is still read to this day by a lot of people who find her case and find it interesting and want to learn more about her. She was very creative, liked to write, and liked to read, and presumably was going to go to graduate school, but I have yet to find anything stating what she was studying. I also didn't see anything or hear anything in the series saying what she was studying or planning to do. This trip to California is what Elisa called her West Coast tour, and she started by taking Amtrak trains and intercity buses down to San Diego. She visited the San Diego Zoo, where she took pictures and posted them on her social media. 2 days later, she checked into the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Now, the documentary gave some more information about the Cecil Hotel than I personally had previously seen in videos about Elisa's case. A little bit of background on the Cecil Hotel. The hotel was built in 1924 as a destination for travelers and tourists. Since there's a railroad down the street, the builders of the hotel and owners wanted to take advantage of that. It was not long after the hotel was completed that the deaths started to occur. There's more than what is listed online, but so far I found this. The first suicide took place in 1927. The documentary gives the impression that the first suicide took place in 1931, but it was actually 1927 when a man shot himself in the head in his room. The suicide in 1931 was a man who ingested poison. The first murder took place in 1944 when a woman gave birth in her hotel room bathroom. She thought the baby was dead and didn't want it, so she discarded his body out the window. She was later charged with the murder, but was acquitted due to insanity. The murder that the documentary brought up was the murder of Goldie Osgood, known as Pigeon Goldie. I couldn't find anything about her age when she died. She was stabbed, beaten, and raped in her hotel room, and later discovered by a hotel worker. Her death remains unsolved. In 1985, the hotel saw its first serial killer guest. Night stalker Richard Ramirez stayed there during his summer killing spree. He would apparently undress in the back alley behind the hotel, take off all his clothes, and then walk up to his 14th floor room in just his bloody underwear. And this apparently didn't turn any heads. No red flags raised by this. By this time, that was how crazy the behavior in the hotel had gotten. In 1991, the hotel saw its second famous serial killer guest, a man named Jack Unterweger, who was visiting from Austria. He stayed at the hotel under the guise of researching the lives of prostitutes, pimps, and Johns in Los Angeles. And he became so friendly with the local police that he actually arranged a few ride-alongs so that he could see people in their natural environment, I guess. While he was there, 3 prostitutes were killed, all in the same manner, and very similar to the manner he had used to kill his first victim in Austria, because what nobody knew about Jack was that he was a convicted rapist and killer who spent 15 years in prison for raping and killing a woman. In 2007, the hotel was sold to another company for $26 million and became one of the new development projects in LA. The city was experiencing gentrification at the time and was trying to basically make downtown LA a little bit more of a better place to stay and visit and live. The new manager was hired. Her name is Amy Price, and she was interviewed in the documentary. She came with plans to improve it and treat it as a corporate job, a corporate situation. Within a very short amount of time, that seemed to change for her. At the time that Amy Price came in to manage the hotel, there were probably 30 or 40 tenants living in the building, and they had been living there for, some of them, years. They couldn't be evicted because the hotel was actually listed as temporary residential, so low income or homeless individuals could live there for extended periods of time as long as they were paying, and they couldn't be evicted under city policies. This is part of a program for lower income and homeless individuals. So instead, they decided to basically rebrand a part of the hotel as a modern youth hostel with like shared rooms and bunk beds. They called it Stay on Main, and they essentially created 2 hotels in one building. Stay on Main had its own lobby, its own floors, new color scheme, logo, paint, mailbox, etc. The tenants that were already living there would stay on floors 2 and 3. Stay on Main was on floors 4, 5, and 6, and the rest of the floors was the Cecil Hotel, which was still used as a hotel. But the elevators were used by everybody. So the same people staying at Stay on Main would use the same elevators as the tenants on floors 2 and 3, and as the guests on 7 through 15. There's 15 floors to the hotel, but it doesn't technically have a 13th floor. Elisa actually booked to stay in the Stay on Main, which put her on floor 5. Personally, I did not know that. I had always been given the impression that she had booked to stay at the Cecil Hotel, not at Stay on Main. So this was new information for me that I appreciated. So Elisa arrived in Los Angeles on January 26th after visiting the San Diego Zoo. She checked into Stay on Main and was put in a shared room with a few other girls. The names of the girls are never released, the number of girls, none of them are interviewed for this documentary. I would have appreciated that, but oh well. And for the first 2 days of her trip, she stays in this room on the 5th floor. After 2 days, she was moved to a single room of her own, I think on the 14th floor, because the girls she was sharing the room with complained about her behavior. I had never heard this before. This was new for me. But she was leaving notes on their beds telling them to go away, go home, get out of here. And at one point, she locked the door and denied entry to another guest, to one of these girls. She wanted a password, but that was never discussed. They didn't know what she was talking about. Her behavior was disruptive and disturbing to them. At some point during her 2 days in Los Angeles, she went to a show taping, which she talked about on her Tumblr. But what she didn't talk about was that she wrote a long, rambling letter to the host of the show. The name of the show has never been released. This letter was not released in the documentary and has never been released. But when she asked staff to give it to this host, they didn't, and instead, security escorted her off the property. At some point during her stay, she went down to the lobby of the hotel and shouted, "I'm crazy, but so is LA." So there was a pattern of odd behavior here, and a lot of it could go back to her bipolar disorder, which I thought the series handled very well. Elisa was last seen by anyone else on January 31st. On February 1st, she was picked up on the hotel's security cameras in the elevator, and that's where the famous elevator video takes place. She pushes a bunch of buttons, the elevator doesn't move, the doors don't close, and all of this strange behavior, or what we would assume is strange behavior, takes place. This is where people become very curious about the situation because it is a bizarre and creepy video to watch if you don't know who that person is or anything about that person. I think that if I watched that video without any context other than this is the video of a missing girl, or the last known footage of a missing girl, I would think a ghost was involved. It is a very strange video, but there is some pretty logical and understandable explanations for that. Why didn't the elevator close? Well, YouTuber John Lorden, interviewed in the documentary, proved that the elevator doors didn't close because one of the buttons that she hit was the door open button. It does look like she's interacting with somebody in the video with some of her motions. Either it looks, I've heard it described as gesturing for somebody to enter the elevator or come on in, or her hand motions have also been described as looking like she's trying to conjure something. So it does look like she's interacting with someone, which again leads to the idea that there's a ghost or the supernatural or something. It was also determined that she was on the 14th floor when she got into the elevator. So if she was on the 14th floor, she turned left when she exited the elevator. One of the things that some people bring up when they look at this video, in the bottom left corner of the door of the elevator, people think they see a shoe of somebody else. But no, that's her flip-flop. That's her own shoe. She was clearly alone. Elisa was prescribed 4 medications. These medications, many of them have a sedating effect and can make you really tired. And stopping them suddenly might cause a major relapse in symptoms. So to take them for a while and then stop them suddenly may make a person incredibly depressed, or may make a schizophrenic person's hallucinations come back and they're stronger than they were before. It's also possible that she never took them correctly or as prescribed and never got the full effects of them, so she never really benefited from them. I have to say, the first time I watched the elevator video outside of the documentary, my thought, initially I did think maybe there is something more going on here. Maybe there is something paranormal or supernatural going on. Maybe somebody else is involved. But as time went on, as I learned more about Elisa and this confirmed it more for me. I started to see that video as the video of somebody clearly going through a mental health crisis. I actually wonder, might have been suffering from schizophrenia. I know schizophrenia generally affects men more than women, but she is about the right age for schizophrenia to start setting in. And it is possible that she felt she couldn't talk about what she was seeing or hearing. It's also possible that she took her medication for 1 or 2 days, stopped suddenly, and was suffering the effects of that. It's possible that she was in a completely manic state and suffering from bipolar 1. But this is all speculation. And again, it looks like a mental health crisis. The sad thing about mental health disorders and medication or treatment of any kind for them is that it's not like taking a blood test and figuring out what dose of Synthroid a person needs to take for their underactive thyroid. And it's not like taking a person's blood sugar and then figuring out how much insulin they need to bring their blood sugar down to normal levels if they're a diabetic. It's more complicated than that. There's no blood test. There's no set parameters most of the time. I mean, yeah, there's medication we know is used to treat schizophrenia, but while Seroquel may work for one person, it may not work for another person with schizophrenia. There are other drugs that work better for some people than others. So it's possible that she was both under-medicated and not on the right medication. It's also possible that she never took her medication as prescribed and as a result never got the full benefit of it. And that's part of why she was prescribed so many medications. The problem is this is all speculation and we will never really know. But what we do know is that she struggled with mental illness, was seeking help, but was not taking the medication as prescribed, as proven by the autopsy, and, in my view, lost her battle with mental illness. And I think the series handles that situation very well. I think it handled her story and what happened very well as all the lives that were affected by her death and by what happened to her. Her parents and sister were clearly affected. It would be strange and stupid to assume that they weren't. One of the things I would have liked to have seen would have been an interview from someone in her family, but I've yet to personally ever find an interview from one of her family members, and they clearly didn't participate in this. I don't know why, but I would have liked to have seen that. It's clear that staff at the hotel was affected. Amy Price wanted to clear the hotel and show that they did care about Elisa, but there was only so much they could do, which is true. How much can a person get involved, especially if they're already surrounded by other very mentally ill individuals, with somebody who's in the lobby shouting that they're crazy, but so is LA, and then they just walk away? What do you do? Maybe someone should have said something, but at what point do we say something? What point do we not say something? I think that's just a very difficult thing in our culture in general. At what point do we get involved? At what point do we not get involved? At what point are we crossing the line? And at what point are we showing care? That's difficult for American culture in general, in my opinion. Maybe it's something we all as individuals need to explore, and maybe that's something we can learn from Elisa's story. I really appreciated the interview with Santiago Lopez. I appreciated that we got to hear from him. I find this part to be very, very important. He is the person who found her body. He saw that scene before the police got there. I just thought that it was good to hear the expression straight from the horse's mouth. Was clearly a lot of miscommunication between Lopez and the LAPD. I don't know how, but there was, and the reporting of the tanks being closed really did add a lot of fuel to the fires of paranormal involvement and conspiracies and murder, but really it was quite logical. I also just want to add, I actually feel bad for Morbid in this story. Yes, I feel so much sympathy for Elisa and her family, and my heart goes out to them. But I also just want to add that I felt bad for Morbid. The bullying that he received from alleged actions and from accusations was undeserved. There was no evidence that he was in the country at the time that she disappeared, and it clearly damaged his life. I really hope that someday he can move past it all and find his way and make music again, and that he finds some peace of his own. So, to conclude, I thought it was very well done. I thought the whole series was very well done. I thought that it was very respectful to Elisa and her story, and that her story clearly touched a lot of people. I think she still continues to touch people's lives. She shows that all of us have our struggles, no matter what we look like or where we're from or what background we come from. We all have our struggles, and sometimes we hide behind a really big smile and we pretend everything's fine. And then sometimes the struggles come out. I think she also shows that sometimes those of us who are really struggling, especially with mental illness, they need a strong community around them to support them and help them and be there for them. And she was away from her community when she died. I'm not blaming anybody or her for what happened to her. I just think it's a good example of that mentally ill individuals need a strong community to be there for them when they need it. My heart goes out to her and her family. I really think that the series handled the story well, and I just hope that everyone has found peace in the answers, and I just hope the best for her family. Thank you for watching and listening to my ramblings. I really appreciate it. Please remember to hit share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. See you next week.